Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from Chase Commercial Term Lending and New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Capital One Bank, the Witkoff Group, Greenberg Traurig, Genova Burns. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Fisher Brothers, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Foley & Lardner, Friedman, Handler Real Estate Organization, HAP Investment Developers, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Madison Realty Capital, Massey-Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Mercantile Commerce Bank, N.A., Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, Newbanks, MHP Real Estate Services, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Sterling National Bank, Sterling Risk, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Continuum Company, the CUNY TV Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
Havana, Seward Park, the streets of Manhattan, Lehman College, around the country, Washington, D.C. I have my friend Arcadio Casillas, who is the head of the Republican Finance Committee for New York, right? The treasurer?
Finance chair.
Finance chair, and who's the president and CEO of Preferred Compensation
Corporation.
So tell me about your parents. How they end up in Cuba?
Well, my father was born in Cuba.
But his family was there many years. At the late 18,
my paternal grandfather, his father was a junior officer in the Spanish military. He resigned his position just before the Spanish-American War. And he married my grandmother, who was French, and they had some business in Haiti. So they married and they stayed in Cuba, and they moved to a place called Cabaiguan, which is in central Cuba, which is really for sugar plantations, tobacco plantations, and so forth, and that's where they went into. They bought land, and they had 8 sons, and each one of the kids did something in the family. They all went to school and so forth. So over a period of time, my paternal grandparents were in effect farmers, and from the perspective of they had sugar plantations, they had tobacco plantations, they have coffee plantations, nothing major, but enough that they did very well, and they were the family in that little place that continued to grow, and then the sons went on to develop other business from timber and so forth and so on.
Your father was a good portion of his life was in the military.
He, the brother, there were 8 of them. The brother that was came before him joined the military, and he took. Then my father joined at age 18. And until he was 45. So he started from the bottom up, and at the end he was the military governor of the most eastern province in Cuba, called Oriente Province. And he went to law school with Fidel. He was a very smart man, very disciplined man, very, I'm lazy, he really wasn't.
Your mother's family was from America, right?
That's right, Pierce, so the last name. And my paternal grandfather was a doctor, surgeon, and he had laboratories down in Cuba and some other businesses and so forth. So in one trip in which they were down in Cuba, my mother met my father, She was around 21. And they like each other, fell in love, and married.
You're born in 1946 or something in that range.
8.
48. And your father is still in the military.
Correct.
And what happens is you have an uncle who had an altercation with the Communist Party?
The brother that brought my father to the military, Joaquin, he was a captain in 1948, and he was in eastern Cuba in a place called Holguin, Holguin. And he was giving orders to meet with the head of the Communist Party, who was also a senator in the Cuban Congress, who was trying to provoke the workers during the harvest of the sugar mills to go on strike. And he didn't have the permits and so forth. So he was given instructions to tell this gentleman to desist and to pack it and go or go and get the permits necessary for this. The name of the senator was Jesus Menendez. And Menendez had a wonderful temper, but in addition to that, being a senator and being the head of the Communist Party, he was not about to be told by a low-life captain and his age that he was not to be there and not do what he was doing. So they got into an altercation. They pulled a gun, shot, blew the right ear of the corporal that was with my uncle. My uncle and the other soldiers returned the fire, and the leader of the Communist Party and the senator got killed.
The reason I bring it up is because later on, your parents are living a nice life in Cuba. Your father knew Fidel, as you said. They went to law school together.
Fidel came from a upper middle class family.
Upper middle class. And then what happens? What year is it, 1959, when Batista leaves?
Well, Batista was one of other presidents. I mean,
Right.
he was really elected twice, but things weren't doing too well. The U.S. government was supporting. Batista had fell of grace. In fact, Batista was half Chinese and half mulatto. So very interesting. Most people didn't know that.
When does Fidel take over?
Well, Batista flees on New Year's Eve, 58-59, at the end of 58. And Fidel is up in the mountains, Sierra Maestra. At that point, the leaders have left, a whole bunch of other generals have left. So in effect, the government has collapsed. So the orders that were understood by whoever was the highest office was to tell everyone else to negotiate safe conduct for the men and then turn their arms over to the rebels. Well, the problem with my uncle and my dad from that time back in 1948 was that they had become persona non grata.
With the Communist Party, right?
That's right, because of the Communist Party. And I remember having to go to school with a bodyguard and so forth and so on, and protection, being shot at, my family at our homes and so forth. So we lived a pretty guarded life from the 50s on after, but Fidel had that failed attack on the military garrison in Santiago de Cuba called Moncada. And so at that point, my uncle, who was in Santa Clara, which was where Che Guevara was, there was a major battles going on in there. He decided to give in his command, and the orders were to shoot him on the spot, which is what they did.
They killed him.
That's right there.
And your father was then shot 2 days later?
That was on January 2nd. On January 5th, on January 4th, my father was touring the province of Oriente, and he was in Guantanamo City, which is about 15 minutes away from Guantanamo base. And he negotiated the safe conduit. On the 4th, they turned it over. On the 5th, they were from the sergeant up, non-commissioned, to all the up to him, were condemned to the firing squad, because that's what happened with common assistance. They wanted to eliminate anyone that could be a threat to them. And so they were condemned to the firing squad. On the way down from City Hall where it happened, my dad grabbed a Garand rifle, which is an 8-shooter, and the shootout happened. All the prisoners were shot. They were machine gunned down.
So at this time, it's your mother and you. The family is part of the family still in Cuba. The large.
We were all in Havana at that point.
You're in Havana. Where do you go?
Well, when the news came in, we were staying with my uncle, who was a senator in Cuba, in Havana. My mother had given birth to my youngest brother. And so my uncle went and got asylum in the Mexican embassy. My mother and siblings were separated, and I went to friends of my uncle's two sisters that lived nearby and stayed in their attic for about 60 days. As I mentioned to you earlier, learned how to play canasta and so forth, which was a very interesting game. And then I reunited with my mom. Then we went back to Santiago de Cuba to get our home. But the military commander
Had taken over the home.
Commander Barbarossa, he had a red beard. And so we stayed in a hotel for many months trying to do that, and also tried to be able to have the remains of my father, his body, returned to us. So we were going from Santiago de Cuba to Guantanamo, was a few hours away, and so forth. So eventually we went to Cabaiguan, my grandparents' home, which in effect had been left to any of the children that were in need. It was a big place, kind of out in the country, very nice. And we were there for a while until eventually, this would have been 59, latter part of 59, early part of 60, through whatever negotiation, I was not aware that we got my father body brought into the family pantheon, and we went to Mexico City, where we were there for about 6 months.
And then you go back to Cuba.
No, then we came to New York.
Oh, right, you came to New York.
To New York, and we're here like for 3-4 months, and for some reason unknown to me, because my mom died of a pulmonary embolism in 1976, we had to go back to Cuba. I didn't understand how come, because my mother was a U.S. citizen born in the United States. The family had been here for generations. We were born here. We had dual nationality. We went back. And so now we go back, and we end up in the Olive Pines, because there was no other place to go, staying with the widow of my uncle who had shot Jesus Menendez in the Olive Pines. In the Olive Pines, there were 5 cylindrical buildings, which is called the Presidium, and that's where prisoners are kept. Today, a lot of political prisoners are kept there. As a matter of fact, when Fidel was a prisoner, my uncle happened to be the commandant of that area. And I remember, because every summer I had to go and work on the fields to learn how to deal with people, how to utilize things. I remember when I was 7, I went to work in one of the tobacco plantations. I probably was smoking a cigar and I turned green. But here we are back in the Olive Pine, and I remember that Fidel would come in for lunch, usually with 2 armed guards. And my uncle would dismiss these 2 armed guards because they knew, the family knew each other. And I would be sitting there scared to death, because I figured my uncle did not have any arms, didn't have a sidearm. The 2 soldiers were outside, and you had all these utensils. I figured, this fellow's gonna catch me and gonna kill me. But here we were back in the Isle of Palm.
Now, at this time, your mother returns to America, right?
No, we were there for a while, and then through the Swiss embassy, which was acting on behalf of the United States, as in between, we were able to get flights back to the United States with Pan Am Airlines that was doing the Freedom flights. And we were on a plane in Havana, and I was pulled out of the plane.
That's right. Your mother was...
My mother came.
Mother came, but you were pulled out of the plane.
I was pulled out, and I remained back in Cuba.
And you remained in Cuba for what, 30 days?
No, for over a year, until I came out in May 5th, 1963.
So May 5th, 1963, you come to the Seward Park projects, co-op, right?
That's done. We're down at 279 Broome Street.
279.
Right across, there's a lovely synagogue that clothed me and everything else.
And then it was the Seward Park apartments.
That's right.
And where did you go to public school growing up?
I went to Seward Park High School.
Right.
I was in the fencing team and the shooting team, the rifle team.
And you, at that time, you were also figuring a way to make a living. Okay?
Well, I was working.
That's right. You were working at that
everything
time.
and anything.
Right.
I was shoe shining. I was doing plum jobs. I was cleaning snow, whatever could be done to earn a living. I was shoe shining on Delancey and Stanton all around to Orchard Street.
So you graduate the high school, Seward Park, and then you...
Well, before I graduated, we moved to Brooklyn. And we were, matter of fact, on Broadway and Chauncey, and then there was a place called Blanchard's that manufactured Halloween. They did Halloween. And I worked with them for years, and then I will commute to Seward Park. Then I graduated Seward Park High School. And in those days, you had also the draft going on because you had the Vietnam War and so forth. And I was going to Hunter Uptown, which is what it was called. And I was taking about 12 credits for about a year. I graduated with 168 credits because then the Selected Service Office told me, you better finish this thing fast. I had to give me a token, 2 tokens, one to go back home and one when they called me to go in. And so I moved to the Bronx. And at that point, I was working for Kinney's Rent-A-Car.
And then Alexander's Rent-A-Car.
And then first Alexander's Rent-A-Car, then Kinney's Rent-A-Car. Then when that didn't work out, I played cards for a while, and then I tutor. I saved money so that I was able to sustain myself. At that point, my mother was living by Prospect Park, and I had an apartment at the Lewis Morris building on the concourse on 175th Street.
You graduate college, so what do? It's a tough time to find a job, right?
I became a bartender at the Four Seasons in the kitchen area.
Four
and then
Seasons
eventually
restaurant,
the Four Seasons restaurant on Park Avenue,
and
which
then,
was a great job for a few months.
And then what happens?
Well, then I was getting a job, and I went and interviewed for the real estate market was dead. There was only 2 markets, real estate and insurance, life insurance.
And
so I was interviewed by a lot of them, and the one that there was this gentleman by the name of Harvey Blusting. Wonderful, wonderful gentleman. I mean, I love him dearly. Not the best businessman, and he was the general agent for Connecticut Mutual. So I went with Harvey.
So you became a life insurance, but as you said to me, you really weren't good at that time as a life insurance. You didn't
couldn't sell anything.
You couldn't sell. You didn't really enjoy it. So then you became more of an entrepreneur. That you figured out a way that people who were getting SBA loans and other financings
Good memory.
needed insurance, right?
I started helping small business get loans directly with the banks. They didn't know how to do it, or they didn't have the guidance. What happened was there were other individuals that were charging them a percentage of the loan. I thought that was outrageous. So my thing was to charge them a small fee. But the banks required that if they gave you a loan, that you must have life insurance. So it was term insurance. We can't make any money out of term insurance, but it was the right thing for them. But one of the things that I felt that was important was for them to have disability insurance, because it was bound to become disabled. Then what happened? You're not dying. So if you don't have money and you're disabled, it's like living death. So got the banks to do that, and in between continued to do that with group insurance and so forth. And it picked up a bit, and then I got the Venezuelan petroleum companies to become clients. And eventually all the fellows that came here as managers went back to Venezuela. Eventually Venezuela nationalized all the oil companies that went down there. And all these fellows that I've gotten to know over the years were part of the holding company called Petróleos Venezolanos, or PV, which was the holding company. And they were on the board of directors. So somewhere around 1976, 77, I have gotten to know the late Harry Torschener. And Harry Torschener knew Magritte. He was Belgium. He escaped the Nazis dressed as an SS officer, going from Brussels all the way down to Spain, to Argentina, to Cuba, to New York. Went back to law school at Columbia. And after the, I forget which war with Israel, I asked Harry, and he had a beautiful office. It was a gallery with the Magrittes and Seagulls. I mean, my gosh, it was fabulous. And I asked him, give me the one with the rose, but he wouldn't do it. And so Harry, who was about 5'3" and a real super smart lawyer's lawyer, said, who am I, what do you have to talk to me about? I said, why are, he was very friendly, and one of his accounts was the Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast. And I asked him, how come are they buying oil, Saudi light from Saudi? He said, who else? I said, Venezuela. So we're able to put a deal together in which the Ivorians began to make a deal with Venezuela to replace Saudi light with Venezuelan light. And then that also entailed a second phase, which was also redoing the refineries in Abidjan to hold the Saudi light, the specs, the Venezuelan light, which is the specs are different from Saudi light. In the interim, all these relationships continued to enhance. I stayed in the insurance business because all these individuals needed life insurance, and life insurance is a contract. So what I learned from contract law is that if you know what you're doing with the contract, if you know how to take advantage of the product and what it's a unilateral contract, as long as you pay the premiums, the insurance company is supposed to do this. It was great.
There's a couple of things that happened during college, and you were always active in student affairs.
Yes.
But in 1985, as you were talking about the life insurance, you were a member of the $1 Million Roundtable, a very prestigious organization of life insurance sales experts, and you're in San Francisco. And tell me about what happens in San Francisco in 1985, I believe it was?
Yes. June of '85, I was asked to be a platform speaker. It was like a 5-day conference in which you had afternoon technical conversations, and you had producers from all over the world, but you also had the CEOs, presidents, and general counsel of the insurance companies and financial institutions that were already getting into the business.
So you made a speech.
So I gave a speech called "The Lady in the Harbor."
So tell me about the Lady in the Harbor, because that really has had the effect with the Republican Party and the Bushes and so on.
How things work out sometimes is random. But the Lady in the Harbor is really an analogy of at that point, the Statue of Liberty, who was the Lady in the Harbor, was in Scow Falls. And the Lady in the Harbor refers to the fact that if we were to let go of our ethics, if we were to let go of our good habits, if we were to let go and lose sight of our focus and our direction in life, then we fall into despair and repair. So the key is to, at all times, be able to maintain our highest standards and to be able to learn as much as we can and do what is best, not only for us, but for all concerned, our customers and so forth. And then I talk about America. And then there's a piece where I talk about when I was in Cuba. During that time that I was pulled from the plane and remained in Cuba, I was arrested and incarcerated for 33 days and tortured by the Castro government for kind of revolutionary activities. And the same way they took me in, that's the same way they let me out. I had my nails pulled out, everything, all kind of other stuff. And so, and then I talk about the fact that even though I came here after losing everything, and I live in the Lower East Side, I was working 80 hours a week and going to school full-time and so forth. Our country, America, allows us the opportunity to be everything and anything we can be. It has nothing to do what you look like, what your race is, what your religion is. Everyone here has the opportunity to be the best that they can be. And as I travel throughout the world as you have, there's nothing like America. We are not perfect, but it continues to be a wonderful place. So
what happens then?
Well, somehow Vice President Bush got a hold of this tape. Somebody, the oldest thing was filmed at 14,400 people in attendance, and he got a tape. So he called me up, and I thought it was somebody playing a joke. So I hung up with him twice. So finally, my assistant Evelyn Watson says, that's the White House. So I pick up the phone. He says, I know that you love America. I know you care about America. And I would like for you to be involved with this. What do you say to the Vice President of the United States? Of course. So he asked me to go and see Ambassador Walter Curley, who had been ambassador on the Ford to Ireland and had been under Lindsay, the Commission of Protocol and so forth. So I went to see Walter. He asked me if I wanted to go to Washington. I said no. Then he asked me several times that. I said no, I plan to get married, have a family. He said, have you ever done what the Vice President would like to do? I said, what are we doing? So he says, well, we're creating the Fund for American Future. Well, that is the holy grail when it comes to the Bush family. And what it was a PAC to raise money to help the Vice President, to help other candidates that were running for office so that eventually he can go into run for president. And so I said, so what are we supposed to? He says, well, raise money. Have you ever done that? I says, no. He said, what do you think you can do? I said, I can give you a check, but not for much. Well, I had him and I had Bruce Gelb of Bristol Myers and Henry Kravitz as my mentors in this area. And they created a little monster. I used to get butterflies, I still do. But it was being able to raise money, calling individuals and asking for money and so forth. And the whole key was that what really impressed me, what motivated me, was the fact that I met wonderful people that truly care about public service. It wasn't about money. It was really about doing what was best for the country.
So you did that on the national scale. You've been to the the conventions for many, many years. You haven't
Since
missed one.
1988.
Since 1988, you've never missed one. And then you also got involved working with the Giuliani administration also, right?
Yes, I was in protocol with Rudy. I met with Rudy when he was the U.S. attorney, and he was thinking about running for the Senate. But there was not enough time for him to raise the money, so I mentioned to him that it was too late.
And what about your most recent appointment today with the Republican Party in New York?
As finance chair,
Yes.
I really didn't want it. I mean, I loved helping the party and helping making our city a better place and making our state and our country. But I was asked, and I did it, and we created all the regional finance chairs. I'm the overall state chair. I'm also involved in the executive committee of the RNC. And this past cycle, not only did we retain the 6 members of the House that we had, but we added 3 more. We also took over the state Senate, raised about, not only for the state committee, a few $1 million, but also for other candidates. I raised over $10 million. Probably in my lifetime, I raised over $100 million at this point. I should do that for myself.
You should do
so but it's all for the better of the country.
I know you've been very close with both Bushes, and you keep
Yes, I
in
am.
touch with them quite often. But you have some very interesting people in your life, your 2 daughters. Tell me about your daughters. Their names and what are they doing today?
My daughters are the greatest gift that I have. They are a miracle that I've been blessed with. And Stephanie Melissa, who is 28 now, she's one of 2 fellows at Children's Hospital in Houston. She's also in the prenatal bit. My youngest, Christina Alexandra, will be, Stephanie's also a former Fulbright scholar. And Christina will start most likely at Columbia or University of Pennsylvania. Her graduate works in September.
She finished NYU, I think. Where'd she?
Stephanie finished NYU graduate school, and she went to Boston College, graduated with honors. They work very, very hard. They also work. So very low key. They smart. They have had the opportunity to be the best they can be. I've always said that I was here to assist them, for them to seek their dreams and reach their goals. And as you know, education is the best thing that anyone can have. And I am really taken back by the mayor of this city and the UFT and being able to cut back on the charter school. I major in education, and I student taught in the South Bronx Junior High School 131. And I can tell you the kids need an education. The best thing that we can do for all future generations to give them the best education that they can have. Not everyone should be a doctor, but everyone should have an education.
So I'd like to say my buddy here from Havana, who has struggled through his life, his early life, and who has truly become a gentleman, a friend, and a mensch. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Michael. You're a God gift.